Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. When we docked with the derelict station, we expected silence. After all, the Venture and its entire crew were declared lost in space 5 years ago, but the life support was on. We moved through the corridors, calling out, and then we found them. The crew, all of them, floating in the mess hall, perfectly preserved, their eyes wide open. They aren't dead. They aren't alive. They're just paused, stuck in the exact moment the station was ripped from our timeline. And now that we're here, my own hands are starting to feel slow. The air is getting thick. I think we're getting paused too. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning while I still can. My name is Jake Morrison, and 3 weeks ago I was fixing coffee makers in the break room of Johnson Space Center in Houston. Not exactly the glamorous space career I dreamed of as a kid, but it paid the bills. I'd been a maintenance tech there for 8 years, keeping the earthbound stuff running while the real heroes went up to play among the stars. That Tuesday started like any other, until Victor Kozlov found me elbow deep in a busted espresso machine. Victor was one of the senior mission specialists, a Russian guy with calloused hands and eyes that had seen the dark side of the moon. Literally. He'd been on 3 deep space missions before they grounded him for psychological evaluation after his last trip. "Jake," he said, his accent thick with urgency. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows how to fix things that shouldn't be broken." I laughed, gesturing at the coffee machine. "Well, you found your guy. What's eating you, Vic?" He pulled up a chair, his movements twitchy. "They're assembling a crew. Salvage mission. Off the books." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The Venture wasn't destroyed, Jake. It's out there, and it's calling." The Venture had been Victor's ship. He'd been scheduled to be on that mission 5 years ago, until a last-minute medical issue kept him grounded. 43 crew members, including his best friend Dmitri, had vanished into deep space during what should have been a routine mining operation in the asteroid belt. "Victor, you're talking crazy," I said, but something in his eyes made me pause. "The Venture was torn apart by a solar flare. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what they were told." He slid a tablet across to me. "Look at these readings. Deep Space Monitor picked up a signal 3 days ago. The Venture's identification beacon. It's intact, Jake, and it's not where it should be." The screen showed a blip of light against the star field, coordinates that put it somewhere in the outer system, way beyond where any mining operation should have been. But what made my blood slow in my veins wasn't the location. It was the timestamp. The signal had been broadcasting continuously for 5 years, but according to the ship's internal chronometer, only 18 hours had passed. "They want a small crew," Victor continued. "Volunteers only. Officially, we're investigating asteroid mineral compositions. Unofficially." He stood up, his hands shaking slightly. "Unofficially, we're going to find out what happened to my friends. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I'm here, floating in a corridor that smells like recycled air and something else. Something sweet and wrong, like fruit left too long in the sun. And I'm starting to understand that some things that break can't be fixed." The shuttle Hermes launched on a Thursday morning when most of Houston was stuck in traffic, completely unaware that 4 idiots were about to punch a hole through the atmosphere chasing ghosts. Our crew was small by design. Besides Victor and myself, there was Tommy Brennan, a pilot from Boston who'd flown cargo runs to the moon for the past decade. The guy had a laugh that could wake the dead, and a habit of drumming his fingers when he was nervous. The 4th member was Dr. Neil Ashworth, a physicist from Oxford who specialized in temporal mechanics, whatever the hell that meant. He spoke like he was perpetually disappointed in everyone around him, which probably wasn't far from the truth. "So let me get this straight," Tommy said as we cleared Earth's atmosphere, his Boston accent making everything sound like a question. "We're flying out to bumfuck nowhere to investigate a ship that's been dark for 5 years based on a signal that might be a glitch." Victor adjusted his harness, staring out at the expanding void. "Signal's not a glitch. I've run it through every diagnostic we have." "And NASA's cool with this little field trip." Tommy's fingers started their drum solo on the control panel. "NASA doesn't know," Dr. Ashworth said without looking up from his tablet. Officially, we're collecting mineral samples from asteroid cluster 247-B. The paperwork's all filed properly. That made me laugh. Right, because nothing says legitimate science mission like lying to your bosses. Sometimes, Victor said quietly, the truth is too dangerous for committees and bureaucrats. The journey to the outer system took us 6 days. 6 days of recycled air, freeze-dried meals, and the constant hum of the life support systems. By day 3, Tommy had stopped drumming his fingers. By day 5, Dr. Ashworth had stopped talking altogether unless directly asked a question. Victor spent most of his time staring at the navigation display, watching our little blip crawl across the star chart toward coordinates that shouldn't contain anything larger than space dust. On the 6th day, our sensors picked up the venture. Jesus Christ, Tommy whispered, his hands frozen over the controls. The station hung in space like a metal cathedral, its solar arrays stretched wide like wings. Every light was on, every single damn light blazing against the darkness, as if the crew had just stepped out for a coffee break. Life support's active, Dr. Ashworth reported, his voice steady but wrong somehow. Artificial gravity, atmospheric processors, even the navigation beacon. Everything's running normally. How is that possible? I asked. 5 years without maintenance, without supply runs. Victor unbuckled his harness and floated toward the observation window. Dimitri always said the venture was built to last. Redundant systems, self-repairing circuits. But this... He pressed his palm against the glass. This is something else. Tommy initiated our approach, bringing us in slow and careful. As we got closer, I could see through the station's viewports. Lights were on in the corridors. The mess hall was illuminated. Even the recreational areas were lit up like someone was expecting company. Victor, I said, where exactly was the venture supposed to be when it disappeared? Asteroid belt. Mining operation in Sector 7G. Dimitri was leading a survey team for rare earth deposits. He turned from the window. Jake, we're currently 17 billion kilometers from Sector 7G. Dr. Ashworth looked up from his instruments. That's impossible. The venture doesn't have the fuel capacity for that kind of distance. Even with full tanks, they couldn't have made it a quarter of this far. Then how did it get here? Tommy asked. Maybe, Victor said slowly, it didn't travel here. Maybe it was brought here. The docking process took 40 minutes of mechanical whirs and hydraulic hisses as our ship mated with the venture's airlock. Through it all, the station remained perfectly still, perfectly lit, perfectly wrong. Atmosphere's breathable, Dr. Ashworth announced. Temperatures optimal, pressures normal, everything checks out. Too well, Tommy muttered. Everything checks out too well. Victor was already suiting up for EVA. We go in together. Nobody wanders off alone. We find the crew, get some answers, and get the hell out. And if we don't find answers? I asked. He paused, halfway into his suit. Then we make peace with whatever we do find. The airlock cycled with a sound like a giant taking a breath. When the inner door opened, warm air rushed in carrying the scent of recycled oxygen and something else. Something that reminded me of my grandmother's house after she'd been gone for a week. Not decay, exactly. More like time itself had settled into the walls and furniture. Victor stepped through first, his magnetic boots clanking against the metal deck. "Hello?" he called out. "Is anyone here? This is Victor Kozlov with the rescue team." His voice echoed through the corridors, bouncing off the walls and disappearing into the depths of the station. But there was no response, no movement, no sound except the steady hum of the life support systems and our own breathing. "Where is everyone?" Tommy whispered. That's when we found the first sign that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the venture. In the main corridor, floating exactly 3 feet off the deck, was a coffee cup, still steaming. Victor reached out toward the floating coffee cup, then stopped himself. His hand hovered inches away from the ceramic surface, steam still rising from the liquid inside. "Don't touch it," Dr. Ashworth said, pulling out some kind of scanner. "The thermal reading shows it's exactly 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Perfect brewing temperature. That's impossible, Tommy said, his voice tight. Coffee doesn't stay hot for 5 years. Coffee doesn't float for 5 years either, I pointed out. Dr. Ashworth waved his scanner around the cup. No electromagnetic fields, no anti-gravity generators. It's just suspended, as if someone let go of it moments ago. Victor pushed past us deeper into the corridor. Dimitri, can you hear me? It's Victor. We followed him through the main passage. The venture was a mining platform, built for function over comfort, but someone had tried to make it feel like home. Family photos lined the walls, magnetic frames holding pictures of children, wives, parents. A bulletin board displayed work schedules, movie night announcements, and a sign-up sheet for something called Poker with Peterson. But everything was wrong. A magazine hung open in the air, its pages spread as if someone had been reading it while floating. A wrench drifted slowly near the ceiling, rotating end over end in perfect silence. Personal items floated throughout the corridors like a museum of interrupted moments. This is fucked up, Tommy said, and for once, nobody corrected his language. We reached the central hub, where corridors branched off toward the crew quarters, engineering, and the mess hall. Victor consulted a schematic on his tablet. Crew quarters first, he decided, if they're sleeping. The first bunk room was empty, but the beds were unmade, sheets floating like ghosts. Personal belongings drifted throughout the space, a harmonica, someone's reading glasses, a small rubber ball that bounced silently off the walls in slow motion. It's like they all just stopped, Dr. Ashworth murmured, documenting everything with his scanner. The second bunk room told the same story. Empty beds, floating objects, the sense of lives interrupted mid-motion. But in the third room, we found something that made my stomach twist. A man floated near the ceiling, fully dressed in work coveralls, his eyes wide open. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, but he wasn't dead either. There was no decomposition, no sign of trauma. His face held an expression of mild surprise, as if he'd been caught off guard by something interesting. Holy shit, Tommy whispered. Is he... Victor was already moving, pulling himself up toward the floating figure. This is Marcus Webb. He was an engineer, specialized in atmospheric systems. He reached out, then hesitated. His skin, it's warm. Don't touch him, Dr. Ashworth warned. We don't know what's causing this. But Victor was already checking for a pulse. Nothing. No heartbeat, no breathing. But he's not decomposing. It's like He struggled for the words. Like he's frozen in time. We found 3 more crew members in similar states throughout the quarters section, all floating, all perfectly preserved, all wearing expressions of mild confusion or curiosity. None of them showed any signs of distress or fear. Where's the rest of the crew? I asked. The venture had 43 people. Victor consulted his tablet again. Mess hall. If there was some kind of emergency, they would have gathered there. The mess hall was located 2 levels down, accessed through a central shaft that ran the length of the station. As we descended, the wrongness became more pronounced. Food trays floated everywhere, their contents perfectly preserved. Mashed potatoes that should have dried out years ago, gravy that still moved like liquid, green beans that looked like they'd been cooked that morning. And then we saw them. 36 crew members floated throughout the mess hall like underwater dancers frozen in time. Some sat at tables, their forks halfway to their mouths. Others stood near the food line, trays in hand. A few were mid-conversation, their mouths open as if they'd been speaking when whatever happened to them occurred. Jesus, Tommy breathed. Victor pushed through the floating bodies, searching faces. Dimitri, where are you? I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Many of the crew members were looking in the same direction, toward the large viewport that dominated the far wall of the mess hall. Their faces showed the same expression of curious interest, as if they'd all been drawn to look at something outside. Victor, I called out, over here. Near the viewport, a man in captain's stripes floated with his hands pressed against the transparent aluminum, his face turned toward whatever lay beyond. His mouth was open, forming what looked like the beginning of a word. That's Captain Rodriguez, Victor said, pushing himself closer. He was Dimitri's commanding officer. Dr. Ashworth was taking readings throughout the room. Body temperature is consistent across all subjects. Normal human temperature, 98.6 degrees. No signs of rigor mortis, no cellular degradation. It's as if biological time has stopped for all of them. But not for us, Tommy pointed out. We're moving normally. For now, Dr. Ashworth said quietly. Victor found Dimitri near the back of the room, floating with a group of other engineers. His friend looked exactly as Victor had described him, tall, bearded, with the kind of hands that were meant for building things. He was holding what looked like a handheld scanner, pointing it toward the viewport. "What were you looking at?" Victor whispered, reaching out to touch his friend's face. The skin was warm, real. "What did you see out there?" I moved to the viewport to see what had captured their attention. Beyond the transparent aluminum lay the normal vista of deep space. Stars scattered across the void, distant nebulae glowing like painted clouds. Nothing unusual, nothing that would cause an entire crew to stop what they were doing and stare. "There's nothing out there," I said. "There is now," Dr. Ashworth corrected, "but 5 years ago, who knows what they were looking at." Tommy was examining the food service area. "Hey, check this out. There's a note taped to the serving window." The note was handwritten in blue ink on station letterhead. "To whoever finds this, the rules are simple, but you have to follow them exactly. Don't touch the paused ones. Don't look directly at the viewport during the 18-hour cycle. Don't try to leave during a temporal shift. And whatever you do, don't..." The writing cut off mid-sentence, the pen lying on the counter as if the writer had simply stopped existing while writing. "Don't what?" Tommy asked. "Don't fucking what?" Victor took the note, studying the handwriting. "This is Captain Rodriguez's writing. He was trying to warn someone." "Warn them about what?" I asked. Dr. Ashworth's scanner was beeping rapidly. "Temporal distortion readings are increasing. Whatever's affecting this station, it's still active." "We need to find the rest of those rules," Victor said. "If Rodriguez was trying to warn people, there might be more information in his quarters or on the bridge." "Or," Tommy said, his voice strained, "we could get the hell out of here before we end up floating around like museum pieces." That's when we heard it, a low harmonic tone that seemed to come from the station itself, vibrating through the hull and into our bones. The lights flickered once, and for just a moment, I swear I saw movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, everything was still again. But the floating coffee cup we'd seen earlier was gone. "The cycle's starting," Dr. Ashworth said, checking his instruments. "Whatever happens here, it's beginning again." Victor was already moving toward the exit. "Bridge first, then engineering. We find those rules, and we figure out how to get out of here before..." He gestured at the floating crew members around us. "Before we join the permanent exhibition," I finished. As we left the mess hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that some of the crew members had turned their heads to watch us go. The bridge of the Venture sat at the station's apex, accessible through a maintenance shaft that Victor navigated with the familiarity of someone who'd studied every blueprint. The shaft was narrow, designed for emergency access, and climbing through it felt like crawling through the throat of some mechanical beast. "Lights are still on up here too," Victor called back to us. "Everything's powered." When we emerged onto the bridge, I understood why the entire crew had been drawn to look out the mess hall viewport. The bridge's main display showed a view of space that didn't match what we'd seen from any other window on the station. Instead of the star field I expected, the screen showed what looked like a massive spiral of light, rotating slowly against the cosmic backdrop. "What the hell is that?" Tommy asked, floating toward the display. Dr. Ashworth was already scanning the screen. "It's not there now. This must be a recording from 5 years ago." He manipulated some controls, and the image shifted. "Look at the timestamp. This footage is from the day the Venture disappeared." The spiral of light pulsed rhythmically, and as we watched, it seemed to grow larger, or perhaps the station was moving closer to it. The recording quality was perfect, too perfect for something that should have been degraded after 5 years of storage. "There," Victor pointed to a smaller screen that showed internal camera feeds. "Captain Rodriguez." The security footage showed the captain on the bridge, frantically typing at his console while floating crew members drifted past the cameras in slow motion. But Rodriguez wasn't moving in slow motion. He was moving normally, just like we were now. He wasn't affected initially, Dr. Ashworth observed. Whatever caused the temporal suspension, it didn't hit everyone at once. We found Rodriguez's personal log entries still open on his workstation. The final entries were time-stamped across an 18-hour period, exactly matching the cycle mentioned in his note. Hour 1. Something's wrong with the gravitational readings. The spiral's pulling us in, but not physically. It's doing something to time itself. Jenkins in engineering says his chronometer is running slow. Hour 3. More crew members are freezing up. Not dying, freezing. They stop mid-action and just hover there. Dr. Kim thinks it's some kind of stasis field, but they're still warm, still technically alive. Hour 6. I can feel it starting to affect me too. My thoughts are getting sluggish. Takes longer to form words. Writing this entry took me what feels like an hour, but the clock says it's been 3 minutes. Hour 9 figured out the rules. If you follow them exactly, you can stay mobile longer, maybe long enough to find a way out. Rule 1. Never look directly at the spiral during active phases. Rule 2. Don't touch anyone who's been paused. You'll sync with their timeline. Hour 12. Rule 3. The 18-hour cycle repeats. During the reset, you have maybe 10 minutes of normal time. Use them. Rule 4. Don't try to communicate with Earth during active phases. The signal lag becomes infinite. Hour 15. Getting harder to think. Rule 5. If you feel your thoughts slowing, move to a different section of the station. The effect is stronger in some areas. Rule 6. Don't sleep during the cycle. You won't wake up. Hour 17. Can barely type now. Rule 7. The mess hall viewport shows the spiral's current phase. Green light means you have 2 hours of normal time. Red light means the active phase is starting. Rule 8. If you break the cycle by leaving the station during active phase, you'll take the temporal field with you. The final entry was just one line. Hour 18. I can see my hands moving, but I can't feel them anymore. 8 rules, Victor said, just like in the note. Tommy was staring at the main display where the spiral continued its hypnotic rotation. So, this thing, whatever it is, it's still out there. Has to be, Dr. Ashworth said. The temporal effects are still active. I checked my watch. We'd been on the station for 2 hours. How long until the next cycle? Dr. Ashworth consulted Rodriguez's logs. According to this, the cycles don't run on our time. They run on the station's time, and the station's time. He manipulated some controls, bringing up the Venture's chronometer. The station thinks only 19 hours have passed since the crew disappeared. That's impossible, Tommy said. It's been 5 years. Not for the station, Victor said quietly. For the station, it's been less than a day. I moved to one of the other workstations and found more personal logs from crew members who'd managed to stay active longer than others. Engineer Patricia Cole had lasted nearly 12 hours before succumbing. The spiral isn't malevolent, it's not trying to hurt us, it's just existing, like a whirlpool in a river. We flew too close, and now we're caught in its current. Time moves differently here. I've watched Johnson eat the same spoonful of soup for what feels like 6 hours. He's not stuck. He's just experiencing that moment very, very slowly. I think I understand now. We're not frozen, we're stretched. Every second of our experience is being extended across hours, days, maybe years. From our perspective, we're living normally. From the outside, we appear motionless. Physicist Dr. Sarah Kim had left more technical notes. The spiral appears to be a gravitational lens focused on temporal fields rather than light. It's creating a gradient where time moves at different rates depending on your distance from the center. The station is caught in a stable orbit around this gradient. I've calculated our position. We're not in normal space anymore. The spiral transported us to a pocket dimension where conventional physics don't apply. Every 18 hours, the field cycles through different intensities. During low intensity, time moves almost normally, During high intensity, temporal flow approaches zero. "Look at this," Dr. Ashworth called out. He'd found a video log from Rodriguez, recorded during hour 16 of that final cycle. The captain appeared on screen, but something was wrong with the recording. He moved in stuttering motions, as if the video was skipping frames. When he spoke, his words were distorted, stretched out like an old cassette tape played at the wrong speed. "If anyone finds this..." Each word took several seconds to form. "Don't try to rescue us. The field will spread. Every ship that comes here becomes part of the trap." The video cut off abruptly. "He was trying to warn people away," Victor said. "That's why there was never a rescue mission. NASA probably received this transmission." Tommy was checking his own watch, then comparing it to the station's chronometer. "Guys, I think we have a problem. My watch says we've been here for 2 hours and 15 minutes. The station's clock says we've been here for 47 minutes. Dr. Ashworth immediately began taking readings. "Temporal field is definitely affecting us. We're experiencing time at roughly a 3-to-1 ratio compared to the station's reference frame." "Which means," I asked, "which means the longer we stay here, the slower we'll move relative to normal space-time. Eventually, we'll sync completely with the station's temporal field." Victor was studying Rodriguez's final log entries. "According to this, we have maybe 6 hours before the next active phase. During the active phase, the temporal effect accelerates. That's when people get paused." "So we leave before then," Tommy said. "Simple." "Not simple," Dr. Ashworth corrected. "Rodriguez's Rule 8 says if we leave during an active phase, we take the temporal field with us. We could end up spreading this effect to Earth. And if we don't leave," I pointed out, "we end up floating around here forever." That's when Victor made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in Rodriguez's personal files was a video message addressed specifically to him. "Victor, if you're watching this, then you came looking for us despite my warnings." Rodriguez's image filled the screen, recorded during the early hours of the crisis when he could still speak normally. "I know you blame yourself for not being on this mission. Don't. What happened here was nobody's fault." The captain paused, looking directly into the camera. "There's something else in the logs I didn't have time to write down. The spiral. It's not a natural phenomenon. We found wreckage inside it. Pieces of ships, stations, structures from dozens of different civilizations. This thing has been collecting vessels for millennia, maybe longer." "Jesus," Tommy whispered. "But here's the important part," Rodriguez continued. "Some of the wreckage shows signs of escape, ships that broke free somehow. I think I know how, but I ran out of time before I could test it. The key is in the engineering logs. Dr. Peterson figured out how the spiral maintains its hold on objects caught in its field." The message ended there, but Victor was already moving toward the exit. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Engineering. If Peterson found a way out, we need to find his research." As we prepared to leave the bridge, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The main display still showed the spiral, but now it looked different, brighter, more active. And according to the mess hall viewport indicator that Dr. Ashworth had pulled up on his scanner, the light was shifting from green to amber. "How long do we have?" Victor asked. Dr. Ashworth checked his calculations. "At our current rate of temporal displacement, maybe 4 hours of subjective time before the red phase begins." "Then we'd better move fast," Victor said. But as we descended toward the engineering section, I realized that fast was becoming a relative term. My movements felt slightly sluggish, like I was walking through water. And when I tried to speak, the words seemed to take longer to form than they should have. The station was already beginning to claim us. The engineering section felt different from the rest of the station. Where other areas hummed with the steady rhythm of life support systems, engineering thrummed with a deeper vibration that seemed to sync with my pulse. The walls here were lined with diagnostic panels, their screens flickering with data streams that hurt to look at directly. Victor led us through a maze of equipment toward the chief engineer's station. "Peterson was old school," he said, his words coming slower than they had an hour ago. If he figured something out, he would have written it down. We found Dr. Peterson floating near his workstation, a thin man with grease-stained coveralls and reading glasses that hung from a chain around his neck. His hands were positioned over a keyboard, fingers poised to type. On the screen in front of him, a partially completed equation waited for completion. "Look at his eyes," Tommy said, and I noticed what he meant. Peterson's eyes were moving, not the rapid movement of REM sleep, but a slow, deliberate tracking motion, as if he was reading something we couldn't see. "He's still thinking," Dr. Ashworth observed, running his scanner over the frozen engineer. "Neural activity is present, but extremely slowed. From his perspective, he's probably completing that equation right now." I checked Peterson's desk and found a notebook filled with calculations and diagrams. The handwriting grew progressively more erratic as the pages progressed, eventually becoming barely legible scrawl. But the final entry was different, written in careful, deliberate letters as if Peterson had fought against the temporal field to get the words down clearly. "Resonance, escape. The spiral maintains its hold through temporal resonance. Every object caught in the field vibrates at the same frequency as the spiral's core. Change the frequency, break the lock. Station's main fusion reactor can be overloaded to create counter-resonance. Duration, 30 seconds maximum. Window for escape during red phase transition. Warning, overload will destroy station." "Son of a bitch," Victor said, reading over my shoulder. "He found a way out." Tommy was examining the fusion reactor controls. "Overloading a fusion reactor? That's not exactly a precision operation. We're talking about controlled nuclear explosion." "Peterson wouldn't have suggested it unless he was certain," Victor said. "He was the best engineer in the fleet." Dr. Ashworth was studying Peterson's calculations. "The mathematics are sound. A carefully timed overload would create a temporal shockwave that disrupts the resonance field. But the timing has to be perfect." "When?" I asked. "During the transition from green phase to red phase, the field is unstable then, vulnerable to disruption. Miss the window." He gestured at the floating crew members around us. Victor checked his tablet, comparing our timeline to the station's chronometer. "How much time do we have?" "That's the problem," Dr. Ashworth said. "Time isn't consistent anymore. My instruments show we've been here for 4 hours, but the station says it's been 97 minutes. Our perception is accelerating relative to the field." I tried to do the math in my head, but the numbers felt slippery, like trying to hold water. "So, how long until the next transition?" "Based on Rodriguez's logs, transitions happen every 18 hours station time. But..." Dr. Ashworth consulted his readings. "The field is cycling faster than it should. Something's changed since the original crew was caught." Tommy was floating near one of the viewport windows, staring out at the spiral. "Guys, I think I know what's changed. Look outside." The spiral was larger than it had been in Rodriguez's recordings. The swirling bands of light extended further into space, and new objects were caught in its rotation. Pieces of debris, what looked like parts of other ships, even what might have been asteroids torn from their orbits. "It's growing," Victor said. "The field is expanding." "Which means," Dr. Ashworth added, "the cycles are becoming more frequent. The 18-hour pattern Rodriguez documented is compressing." That's when the lights flickered, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not physical, but temporal. For a moment, everything around me seemed to slow further, as if I was watching the world through thick glass. "Phase transition starting," Dr. Ashworth announced, his voice sounding distant despite being right next to me. "The field strength is increasing." Victor was already moving toward the reactor controls, but his movements looked strange, too fluid, like he was swimming through air. "We need to set up the overload sequence now, while we can still move normally." "Normally?" Tommy laughed, but the sound was distorted. "Listen to yourselves. You're all talking like you're underwater." He was right. Our voices had taken on that stretched quality we'd heard in Rodriguez's final video log. The temporal field was affecting our vocal cords, making speech take longer to form. Dr. Ashworth consulted Peterson's notes while Victor worked at the reactor console. "The overload sequence requires precise timing. Initiate the cascade. Wait for core temperature to reach critical threshold, then trigger the resonance pulse. How precise? Victor asked, his fingers moving over controls that Peterson had helpfully labeled with emergency tape. Plus or minus 3 seconds. Any longer and the reactor explodes without creating the counter-resonance. Any shorter, and the pulse won't be strong enough to break the field. I was watching the viewport indicator on Dr. Ashworth's scanner. The light was shifting from amber to deep orange. How much time? Subjective time or station time? Dr. Ashworth asked. Either. Both. I don't know. Station time, maybe 20 minutes. Subjective time. He paused, doing calculations. Maybe 2 hours, but that's assuming our perception rate stays constant. Victor had the reactor controls open, following Peterson's step-by-step instructions. Initiation sequence is armed. When I trigger this, we'll have exactly 30 seconds to get to the shuttle and detach from the station. Can we make it in 30 seconds? Tommy asked. Not walking, Victor said. We'll have to use the emergency transit pods. They're designed to get crew from any section to the docking bay in under 15 seconds. I found the transit pod controls and activated the system. 3 pods were available, each designed to hold 2 people in an emergency evacuation scenario. Victor and Dr. Ashworth in Pod 1, I decided. Tommy and me in Pod 2. We launch simultaneously the moment Victor triggers the overload. What about Pod 3? Tommy asked. Backup, in case something goes wrong. Dr. Ashworth was monitoring the field strength. Transition is accelerating. Orange phase will last maybe 10 minutes, then red phase begins. Red phase is when the field locks completely, Victor said, reviewing Rodriguez's notes one more time. Anyone still on the station when red phase starts will be frozen permanently. I checked my watch again, but the numbers didn't make sense anymore. The digital display seemed to be running at half speed, the seconds taking too long to change. Victor, I said, whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. He nodded, his hand hovering over the reactor override. Everyone get to the pods. When I trigger this sequence, we'll have 30 seconds of chaos before the counter-resonance pulse fires. As we moved toward the transit pods, I noticed something that made my blood feel thick in my veins. Dr. Peterson's eyes had stopped moving. His neural activity was shutting down as the field strengthened. He's finally succumbing, Dr. Ashworth observed. The transition to red phase affects even the partially resistant. Victor sealed himself into Pod 1 with Dr. Ashworth. Tommy and I climbed into Pod 2. Through the pod's small viewport, I could see Victor at the reactor controls, his hand positioned over the emergency override. On my mark, Victor's voice came through the comm system, distorted but understandable. 3, 2. The viewport indicator on Dr. Ashworth's scanner shifted from orange to red. Now! Victor's hand slammed down on the override, and every light on the station went out simultaneously. The station plunged into absolute darkness for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red that made the floating crew members look like demons suspended in blood. Reactor cascade initiated, Victor's voice crackled through the comm system. Temperature rising, estimate 28 seconds to pulse. I could feel the station shuddering around us as the fusion reactor began its controlled destruction. The vibrations weren't just mechanical, they were temporal, rippling through the fabric of space-time itself. My teeth ached with frequencies that shouldn't exist. Pod systems are active, Tommy reported, his hands dancing over the launch controls. But something's wrong with the navigation. According to the computer, we're moving at 0.001% of normal speed. That's the red phase. Dr. Ashworth's voice came through the comm, stretched and distorted. Time dilation is approaching maximum. From the outside, we appear nearly frozen. Through the pod's viewport, I watched the Venture's corridors scroll past in slow motion as emergency personnel, the few crew members who had remained mobile longer, drifted through the passages like ghosts. They were moving, but barely, their actions reduced to the speed of continental drift. 20 seconds, Victor announced. The reactor's hum had become a scream that I felt in my bones. Lights flickered throughout the station as power systems tried to compensate for the massive energy drain. In the distance, I could see the mess hall viewport glowing with an angry red light that pulsed in rhythm with the reactor's countdown. There, Tommy pointed through our pod's window. The shuttle bay. The Hermes sat in its docking cradle, looking impossibly small against the vast machinery of the station's primary docking facility. But as we approached, I realized something was wrong with our perception of distance. The shuttle seemed to be getting further away, even as we moved toward it. Space-time distortion, Dr. Ashworth explained, his voice now so slow I had to concentrate to understand him. Distance itself is being stretched by the temporal field. 15 seconds, Victor called out. Our transit pod slammed into the docking bay's magnetic capture system with enough force to rattle my teeth. Through the tiny porthole, I could see Victor and Dr. Ashworth's pod arriving simultaneously, their emergency vehicle spinning slowly as it locked into place. Move, 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 Victor shouted as our pod split open. But moving was becoming almost impossible. The air itself felt thick, resistant, like trying to run through honey. Each step toward the Hermes required enormous effort, and I could see Tommy struggling beside me, his face contorted with the strain of basic motion. 10 seconds, Victor gasped. Dr. Ashworth was taking readings as he fought his way toward the shuttle. Temporal coefficient approaching 0. We're almost completely synchronized with the station's reference frame. I reached the Hermes first, my hands fumbling with the airlock controls. The systems responded sluggishly, each button press taking what felt like minutes to register. Behind me, I could hear Tommy muttering under his breath, not words, but numbers. He was counting seconds, trying to maintain some sense of normal time in a world where time itself had become meaningless. 5 seconds. Victor practically threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands moving over the startup sequence with desperate efficiency. The Hermes came alive around us, engines spinning up, docking clamps disengaging, but everything was happening in slow motion. 3 seconds. Through the shuttle's main viewport, I could see the spiral clearly now. It had grown massive, filling half the visible sky with its rotating bands of light. And there, caught in its outer rings, were the shadows of other vessels. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all trapped in the same temporal prison that held the Venture. 2 seconds. The Hermes pulled away from the station, but our movement felt sluggish. Wrong. We were traveling at normal speed relative to the station, but the station itself was locked in temporal amber. 1 second. Victor's hand hovered over the final thruster control. "If this doesn't work," he said, his voice barely audible, "it's been an honor serving with you." 0. The reactor exploded, but it wasn't the violent detonation I expected. Instead, the fusion core collapsed inward, creating a sphere of absolute nothingness at the heart of the Venture. For a moment that lasted forever, the station folded in on itself, its metal corridors and floating crew members compressed into a point of infinite density. Then the counter-resonance pulse fired. Reality snapped back like a rubber band, and suddenly we were moving at impossible speed. The Hermes shot away from the Venture as if launched from a cannon, the station shrinking behind us until it was just another point of light against the stars. "Status report," Victor called out, his voice normal again, no longer stretched by temporal distortion. "We're free," Tommy said, checking our navigation systems, distance from the station increasing at maximum engine capacity. Dr. Ashworth was monitoring the space behind us. "The spiral is collapsing. Peterson's calculations were correct. The counter-resonance disrupted the temporal field stability." I watched through the rear viewport as the spiral began to unravel, its bands of light breaking apart and dissolving into the cosmic background. The Venture was caught in the center of the collapse, its hull buckling and twisting as space-time reasserted its normal properties around it. "What about the crew?" Victor asked quietly. "Gone," Dr. Ashworth said. "When the temporal field collapsed, everyone caught in the suspension would have experienced 5 years of time in an instant. Their bodies couldn't handle the transition." Victor was silent for a long moment, staring at the rapidly shrinking point of light that had been his friend's prison. "Dmitri always said he wanted to see the edge of the universe," he finally said. "I guess he got his wish." But as I watched the spiral's death throes, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The collapse wasn't complete. Small fragments of the temporal field were breaking away, drifting into deep space like seeds on a cosmic wind. "Dr. Ashworth," I said, "are you seeing this?" He followed my gaze and his face went pale. "The field is fragmenting, not dissipating. Those pieces, they're still active." "What does that mean?" Tommy asked. "It means the spiral might be gone, but the temporal distortion isn't. Those fragments will eventually find other objects to latch onto. Ships, stations, maybe even planets." Victor was already plotting a course back to Earth. "Then we need to warn them. NASA needs to know what's out here." "Will they believe us?" I asked. "They'll have to," Victor said. "We have the sensor data, the recordings, Peterson's calculations, everything they need to understand the threat." As the Hermes began its long journey home, I kept watching the fragments of the spiral drift through space. Most were too small to see clearly, but one caught my attention. A swirling mass of distorted light that was roughly the size of a small asteroid. "Victor," I said, "plot the trajectory of that fragment. The large one, bearing 127 Mark 34 inches. He ran the calculations and went very still. "It's headed for the inner system." "How long until it reaches Earth?" "At current velocity, 18 months. Dr. Ashworth was taking readings of the fragment. "It's stable, maintaining temporal coherence. If it encounters any significant mass, a space station, a large ship, even a substantial asteroid, it could recreate the spiral effect." "So what do we do?" Tommy asked. Victor was already composing a message for Earth. "We warn them. We give them Peterson's research and Rodriguez's data, and we hope they can figure out how to stop it before it's too late." As Earth grew larger in our forward viewport over the following days, I couldn't shake the feeling that our escape hadn't been a victory. It had been a reprieve. The Venture and its crew were gone, but the nightmare they'd discovered was still out there, drifting through space like a virus looking for a new host. On the 5th day of our journey home, Tommy made a discovery that confirmed my worst fears. "Jake," he called out from the communications station, "you need to hear this." He played back a transmission we'd received during our escape, a standard shipping manifest from a cargo hauler called the Prosperity. The ship had been carrying mining equipment to the asteroid belt when it encountered what the crew described as unusual gravitational readings in Sector 12J. "That's where the largest fragment is headed," Victor said. The transmission was 3 days old. The Prosperity had been carrying a crew of 12. "We need to go faster," I said. "We're already at maximum velocity," Victor replied. "The Hermes wasn't designed for extended high-speed travel." "Then we need to send another message to Earth," I said. "Tell them to contact the Prosperity. Warn them to stay away from Sector 12J." But when Tommy tried to raise Earth on long-range communications, all we got was static. "Interference," he reported. "Something's blocking our transmissions." Dr. Ashworth checked his instruments. "Temporal distortion. The fragments are affecting subspace communications across multiple sectors." "How many fragments are there?" Victor asked. Dr. Ashworth ran calculations based on our sensor data from the spiral's collapse. 17 major pieces, hundreds of smaller ones. They're spreading throughout the outer system. As Earth continued to grow in our viewport, I realized that our journey home wasn't an escape. It was a race. We had to reach Earth before the fragments found new victims, before the nightmare of the Venture could spread to other ships, other crews, other friends and families. But looking at the vast emptiness of space around us, filled with invisible fragments of temporal distortion, I wasn't sure we were going to make it in time. 3 days out from Earth, we picked up the Prosperity's final transmission. Tommy had been monitoring all frequencies, hoping to catch any chatter from ships in the outer system. What we found instead was 12 minutes of audio that made my hands shake as I listened to it. The transmission started normally, Captain Hayes filing a routine status report about successful delivery of mining equipment to Station Ceres. But halfway through, his voice changed. "Control, we're seeing some unusual readings on the gravitational sensors. There's something out here. Looks like a spiral of light, maybe 2 kilometers across. It's beautiful, actually. Never seen anything like it. Victor grabbed the communications panel. That's one of the fragments. It found them. The next few minutes of the transmission were filled with routine chatter as the Prosperity's crew discussed the strange phenomenon. They were curious, not afraid, just like the Venture's crew had been 5 years earlier. "We're moving in for a closer look," Captain Hayes reported. "Science officer thinks it might be some kind of plasma formation. Could be worth studying." "No," Victor whispered, "don't get closer." But the crew of the Prosperity had no way to hear our warning. The transmission continued with normal operational chatter for several more minutes. Then Hayes' voice returned, but slower, more deliberate. "Control, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Our chronometers are running inconsistently. Jenkins reports that his watch stopped, but the ship's computer says time is moving normally." Dr. Ashworth was taking notes, comparing the Prosperity's experience to our own encounter. Same pattern. The temporal field is beginning to affect them. Hayes' final words were stretched out, distorted by the same time dilation we'd experienced. "Control, we're going to need assistance. Something's happening to the crew." The transmission cut off there. "When was this sent?" Victor asked. Tommy checked the timestamp. 18 hours ago, but given the communication lag from their position, he ran calculations. "They've been in the fragments field for almost 2 days." "They're gone," Dr. Ashworth said quietly. 12 more people caught in temporal suspension." I studied the star charts, trying to plot the Prosperity's last known position. The fragment that caught them is not the same one heading for Earth. There are multiple active pieces out there. Victor was monitoring Earth communications, trying to catch any mention of the other fragments. NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Network should have detected the anomalies by now. Why aren't they issuing warnings? That question was answered 6 hours later when we finally broke through the communications interference enough to receive transmissions from Earth. What we found wasn't reassuring. "Unconfirmed reports of temporal distortions in sectors 7 through 12, came a NASA broadcast. "All shipping in the outer system is advised to maintain standard routes and report any unusual gravitational readings immediately." "Unconfirmed reports," Tommy said bitterly. "They know something's happening, but they don't know what." Dr. Ashworth was monitoring the scientific networks. "They're getting data, but it doesn't make sense to them. Gravitational waves that shouldn't exist, chronometer discrepancies on multiple ships, subspace communications being stretched across time. We need to get them Peterson's research," Victor said. "It's the only way they'll understand what they're dealing with." But when we tried to transmit the data, we discovered another problem. The temporal fragments weren't just affecting ships. They were disrupting the very fabric of space-time throughout the solar system. Our transmissions were being scattered across multiple time streams, arriving at Earth as incomprehensible noise. "It's like trying to send a message through a broken kaleidoscope," Tommy said, frustrated after his 5th attempt to reach NASA. "The signal gets split and twisted before it arrives." Victor made a decision that none of us expected. "We're changing course." "What?" I asked. "We're 3 days from Earth." "We're changing course to intercept the fragment that's heading for the inner system. If we can't warn Earth effectively, we'll have to stop the fragment ourselves." Dr. Ashworth looked up from his calculations. "Stop it how?" "We don't have another fusion reactor to overload." Peterson's notes mentioned other possibilities, alternative methods for disrupting temporal fields. Victor brought up the research files we'd recovered from the Venture. Hidden in Peterson's technical specifications was a section labeled Emergency Containment Protocols. If reactor overload is not feasible, temporal fragments can potentially be destabilized through directed gravitational interference. A ship's mass, accelerated to sufficient velocity, can create localized space-time distortions that disrupt temporal coherence. "He's talking about ramming it," I said. "Ramming it with what?" Tommy asked. Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fragment's projected trajectory. "With us, with the Hermes." The shuttle fell silent except for the hum of the life support systems. Outside the viewports, stars wheeled slowly as Victor adjusted our course toward the fragment. "That's suicide," Dr. Ashworth said. "Maybe. But if that fragment reaches Earth orbit, it could affect every satellite, every space station, every ship in the inner system. Millions of people could be caught in temporal suspension." Tommy was running flight calculations. "Even if we intercept the fragment, there's no guarantee a collision would disrupt it. We might just end up trapped like everyone else." "Peterson's calculations suggest otherwise," Victor said. "The kinetic energy of impact, combined with our fusion drive's output, should create enough gravitational distortion to destabilize the temporal field." I thought about the Venture's crew floating in their mess hall for eternity, about the Prosperity's 12 crew members caught in another fragment's embrace, about all the other ships and stations that might encounter the spreading pieces of the original spiral. "What about the other fragments?" I asked. "There are 17 major pieces, hundreds of smaller ones." "We can only stop one," Victor said, "but one is better than none." Dr. Ashworth was studying Peterson's containment protocols. "There's something else here. Peterson theorized that disrupting one fragment might send a resonance pulse through the quantum foam that connects all the pieces, like breaking one link in a chain." "You mean destroying one fragment might destabilize all of them?" Tommy asked. "It's possible. The fragments were all part of the original spiral. They might still share quantum entanglement properties." Victor began plotting our new course. "The fragment will reach the asteroid belt in 14 days. If we push the Hermes to maximum velocity and beyond, we can intercept it in 12 days. "Beyond maximum velocity?" I asked. "We overload the fusion drive, use it like a rocket instead of a steady propulsion system. It'll give us the speed we need, but..." He paused. "It'll also mean we can't decelerate." The implications sank in. We would hit the fragment at tremendous velocity, with enough kinetic energy to potentially disrupt its temporal field, but there would be no surviving the impact. Tommy was the first to speak. "My ex-wife always said I'd die doing something stupid." Dr. Ashworth nodded slowly. "The scientific value of the attempt alone justifies the risk. If Peterson's theory is correct, we could save not just Earth, but every ship in the solar system." I thought about my ordinary life back in Houston, fixing coffee machines, paying rent, wondering if I'd ever do anything that mattered. Now I had the chance to save millions of lives, but it would cost everything. "Victor," I said, "are you sure this is the only way?" He showed me the trajectory calculations. The fragment would reach Earth's orbital sphere in 18 days. Given the expanding nature of temporal fields, it would affect everything in a radius of several million kilometers. Every satellite in orbit would be caught, the International Space Station, the lunar colonies, every ship traveling between Earth and Mars. We're looking at the collapse of human space travel. "And if we ram the fragment?" "If Peterson's right, the resonance pulse disrupts all the fragments simultaneously. If he's wrong..." Victor shrugged. "At least we stop one of them." I looked around at my 3 companions. Victor, driven by guilt over missing the Venture's original mission. Tommy, the cargo pilot who'd seen enough of space to know how dangerous it could be. Dr. Ashworth, the physicist who understood better than any of us what we were facing. "All in favor?" Victor asked. 4 hands went up. Victor engaged the new course, and the Hermes began its final journey toward a collision that would either save the solar system or add 4 more names to the list of those lost to the spiral's hunger. As Earth fell away behind us, growing smaller in our rear viewport, I couldn't help but think about all the people down there who had no idea what was coming. They were going about their normal lives, fixing coffee machines, sitting in traffic, complaining about their jobs, while 4 strangers raced through space to either save them or die trying. I suppose there were worse ways to spend your last 2 weeks alive. On day 11, we saw the fragment for the first time. It was smaller than the original spiral, maybe half a kilometer across, but it burned with the same impossible light. Bands of temporal distortion rotated around its core, like the rings of a dying planet, each revolution bending space-time into shapes that hurt to contemplate. "Distance to target, 47,000 kilometers," Tommy reported. Intercept in 18 hours at current velocity. The Hermes was screaming through space faster than any shuttle had ever traveled. Victor had pushed our fusion drive beyond all safety parameters, turning our modest transport into a kinetic missile. The hull groaned constantly under the stress, and half our systems had shut down from the overload. Temporal readings are spiking, Dr. Ashworth announced. We're entering the fragment's influence zone. I could feel it starting, that familiar sluggishness in my thoughts, the sense that my actions were being stretched across too much time. When I moved my hand, it left trails in the air like disturbed water. How much time do we have before the field locks us up? Victor asked. Dr. Ashworth consulted Peterson's calculations. Based on our velocity and the fragment's apparent strength, maybe 6 hours of normal cognitive function. After that, he gestured at his instruments, which were already displaying temporal coefficient warnings. Victor had spent the past 11 days modifying our collision system. Instead of a simple impact, he'd rigged the fusion drive to overload at the moment of contact, creating what Peterson had called a temporal shockwave. The theory was sound, but theories had a way of falling apart when they met reality. "Final systems check," Victor called out. "Navigation locked on target," Tommy said. "No course corrections possible at this velocity." "Fusion overload sequence armed," I reported. "Trigger will activate automatically on impact." "Temporal monitoring active," Dr. Ashworth added, "recording everything for science." Victor took a long look around the cramped shuttle cabin that had been our home for almost 2 weeks. "Any last words?" "Yeah," Tommy said. "Next time someone offers me a job that sounds too interesting, I'm staying home." Dr. Ashworth was surprisingly philosophical. "I've spent my career studying time, but I never understood it until now. Time isn't a river or a road. It's more like breathing. You don't notice it until something goes wrong." Victor nodded. "I keep thinking about Dimitri, about all the crew members we left floating in that mess hall. At least they got to see something nobody else has ever seen. At least their sacrifice meant something." "Our sacrifice," I corrected. "Our sacrifice is going to mean something too." The fragment grew larger in our forward viewport, its rotating bands of light casting shifting patterns across the shuttle's interior. As we got closer, I could see other objects caught in its gravitational embrace. Chunks of asteroid, pieces of what might have been spacecraft, all of them moving in slow, hypnotic orbits around the fragment's core. 15,000 kilometers, Tommy announced. His voice was already taking on that stretched quality we'd learned to fear. The temporal field was definitely affecting us now. My watch had stopped completely, its digital display frozen at 1433. Dr. Ashworth's instruments showed our time dilation coefficient approaching dangerous levels. "Can everyone still move normally?" Victor asked. We tested our reflexes, moving arms and legs to confirm we weren't yet caught in the field's full grip. Everything felt heavy, like we were wearing underwater suits, but we could still function. 10,000 kilometers. Through the viewport, I could see the fragment structure more clearly. It wasn't just a spiral of light. There were physical components embedded in the temporal distortion. Pieces of metal, crystalline structures, what looked like fragments of technology from dozens of different civilizations, all frozen in the moment of their capture. "Jesus," Victor whispered, "how long has this thing been collecting ships?" "Long enough to span multiple galactic civilizations," Dr. Ashworth said. "Some of that debris looks old, really old." 5,000 kilometers. The fragment's gravitational influence was beginning to affect our trajectory. The Hermes shuddered as space-time itself bent around us, creating eddies and currents in the fabric of reality. Our fusion drive was fighting against forces that Newton never dreamed of. "Systems are holding," I reported, though several warning lights had begun flashing across the control panels. 2,000 kilometers. The fragment filled half our forward viewport now, its rotating bands of light creating a hypnotic pattern that made my eyes water. I had to force myself to look away before the visual rhythm synchronized with my brain patterns. "Whatever happens," Victor said, his words coming slowly and deliberately, "remember that we chose this. We're not victims. We're not accidents. We're weapons. 1,000 kilometers. Time was definitely slowing around us. The Hermes engine noise had dropped to a deep bass rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. When Tommy moved his hand over the controls, I could trace the path of his fingers through the air. 500 kilometers. The fragment's core was visible now, a sphere of absolute darkness surrounded by the temporal distortions. Looking at it directly caused vertigo, as if I was staring into a hole that led outside of normal space-time. 100 kilometers. Victor's hand hovered over the manual trigger for the fusion overload. If the automatic system failed, he would detonate our drive manually, ensuring the shockwave fired at the moment of impact. 50 kilometers. I could see individual pieces of debris orbiting the fragment's core. A section of hull plating with markings in an alphabet I didn't recognize. What looked like part of a solar array, its panels twisted into impossible configurations. A piece of what might have been a navigation beacon, still blinking with light that took forever to fade. 10 kilometers. The temporal field was locking us down now. Victor's movements had become glacial, his hand approaching the manual trigger with agonizing slowness. Tommy was frozen at his station, his mouth open as if trying to speak words that would never come. 5 kilometers. Dr. Ashworth had managed to activate one final recording sequence, documenting our approach for whatever remained of human science. His scanner showed temporal readings that didn't make sense, coefficients approaching infinity, time dilation factors that broke the laws of physics. 1 kilometer. I could see the exact moment when we crossed the fragment's event horizon. Reality twisted around us like hot glass, bending and flowing in directions that didn't exist. The Hermes stretched and compressed simultaneously, its hull becoming elastic under the stress of conflicting temporal fields. Contact in 3, 2, 1. The impact wasn't what I expected. Instead of a violent collision, it felt like sinking into warm honey. The fragment's core absorbed our momentum, drawing us deeper into its temporal embrace. For a moment that lasted eternity, we were part of the fragment's collection, 4 more specimens in its museum of captured vessels. Then Victor's finger found the manual trigger. The fusion drive didn't just overload, it inverted, creating a sphere of negative space-time that existed for exactly 0.003 seconds. In that tiny window, the laws of physics reversed themselves. Gravity became repulsion. Time flowed backward. Matter and energy exchanged properties. The fragment's core collapsed inward, then exploded outward in a shockwave of pure temporal energy. Its carefully maintained spiral structure came apart like a house of cards in a hurricane, releasing all the captured vessels and debris into normal space-time. But Peterson had been right about the quantum entanglement. The shockwave spread outward from our impact point at the speed of light, but it also traveled backward and forward through time, reaching every other fragment simultaneously across all possible timelines. One by one, the other temporal distortions began to destabilize, their spiral structures unraveling as the resonance cascade propagated through the quantum foam that connected them. The fragment that had trapped the Prosperity flickered and died, releasing 12 crew members who had been suspended for days back into normal time. The smaller fragments scattered throughout the outer system lost their coherence, becoming nothing more than exotic radiation that dispersed harmlessly into space. In the seconds before the Hermes was torn apart by the collapsing temporal field, I saw something that made the entire sacrifice worthwhile. Through our disintegrating viewport, I watched as space-time reasserted its normal properties across millions of cubic kilometers. The universe was healing itself, erasing the scars left by the ancient spiral. Victor had been right. Our sacrifice meant something. The last thing I remember was the feeling of time flowing normally again for just a moment before the shockwave reached us and scattered our atoms across half the solar system. We had stopped the fragments. We had saved Earth and everyone in it. But we weren't going home. From the personal files of Dr. Elena Vasquez, Director of Deep Space Operations, NASA Johnson Space Center, classified Level 7, eyes only. Today marks 3 months since the Henderson event, though we're still not sure that's the right name for it. Henderson was the first astronomer to detect the energy pulse that swept through the outer system on March 15th. but he had no idea what he was looking at. What we know for certain, at 14:33 GMT, every deep space monitoring station recorded a massive temporal shockwave originating from coordinates that should have contained nothing but empty space. The energy signature was unlike anything in our databases, a cascade of space-time distortions that propagated faster than light through quantum channels we're only beginning to understand. What we suspected, 4 people died saving the solar system from something we can barely comprehend. The Prosperity appeared in Earth orbit 2 days after the event, its crew confused and disoriented, but alive. Captain Hayes filed a report about encountering a spiral of light that trapped his ship for what felt like minutes but lasted nearly a week. His chronometers had stopped working, his crew had experienced shared hallucinations of floating in place, and then suddenly they were free, drifting in normal space with no memory of how they'd escaped. Similar reports came from 6 other vessels scattered throughout the asteroid belt. Ships that had been missing for days or weeks, suddenly operational again, their crews telling impossible stories about time moving like molasses and reality bending around them. The pieces didn't come together until we found the wreckage. Debris analysis confirmed that the Hermes had been destroyed at the epicenter of the Henderson event. We recovered fragments of hull plating, pieces of the fusion drive, even personal items belonging to the crew. Everything was scattered across thousands of cubic kilometers, as if the shuttle had been disintegrated by forces operating on a subatomic level. But we also found Dr. Ashworth's final data recordings. The quantum storage device survived because it existed partially outside normal space-time when the Hermes was destroyed. The data it contained defied belief: documentation of temporal fields, recordings of human beings suspended in time, calculations for disrupting space-time itself through directed kinetic impact. Most disturbing were the personal logs. Viktor Kozlov talking about finding his friend Dmitri floating in a mess hall, perfectly preserved after 5 years. Jake Morrison describing coffee that stayed hot for decades. Tommy Brennan counting seconds that lasted hours. The Venture herself was gone, erased from the universe along with every trace of the temporal spiral that had consumed her. But the data remained, and the data told a story that kept me awake for weeks. These 4 men, a grounded astronaut, a maintenance technician, a cargo pilot, and a physicist, had discovered something that could have destroyed human space travel. Instead of running, instead of trying to save themselves, they chose to become a weapon. The official record states that the Hermes was lost during a routine survey mission in the outer system. The crew are listed as missing, presumed dead. Their families received the standard death benefits and condolences. But I know the truth. I know that every satellite in Earth orbit, every ship traveling between the planets, every human being working in space owes their existence to 4 people who made an impossible choice. There's a memorial garden at Johnson Space Center now dedicated to those lost in service to space exploration. Viktor Kozlov's name is there, along with Jake Morrison, Tommy Brennan, and Dr. Neil Ashworth. Visitors think they're honoring brave explorers who died in accidents. They have no idea they're standing before the graves of the saviors of humanity. I come to the garden sometimes when the weight of keeping their secret becomes too much. I sit on the bench beneath Victor's memorial plaque and think about what he said in his final log entry. At least their sacrifice meant something. He was wrong about one thing, though. It wasn't just their sacrifice that meant something. It was everyone's sacrifice. The crew of the Venture floating forever in their moment of discovery. The people on the Prosperity and the other ships experiencing eternity in the space between seconds. Even us, the ones left behind to carry their secret and make sure their story never gets told. Because some truths are too dangerous for the world to know, and some heroes are too important to be forgotten, even if they can never be remembered.